Have you been watching any of Andor?
I watched the first episode. I was kind of impressed. And then I kind of lost interest.
Oh.
And then I watched the second episode. And it was okay too. Like, it was well done.
Mm-hmm.
And then I lost interest because I realized this whole thing is just like a vehicle to sell toys and stuff.
I mean, hasn't Star Wars always been that?
I know, but like, I was hoping for something different in this series. Kind of like The Mandalorian, where it was more story-driven and character-driven. And
you sound like me now, because I'm always the one to defend the Star Wars shows.
I know, but now I'm just like, I've given up trying to defend it. The Mandalorian was great until the end. And then now that I've seen this show, that horrific Obi-Wan show, I'm totally done with Disney Plus's Star Wars. Just Disney Star Wars.
You keep saying that, but there's a new season of Mandalorian coming in next year.
I mean, I'll watch it, but I'm like, it doesn't make me excited the same way I used to. It's kind of like,
sure.
I really don't care for some of the superhero films out there, but I'm going to go watch them anyway. It's kind of like, I've invested so much. I kind of know it. But I am pretty close. Like, I am pretty close to the verge of like just
quitting Star Wars.
Just not going out to see the movies unless I can really help it.
On that same note, then, are you going to watch any of the upcoming DC stuff like Black Adam or Shazam sequel, whatever it's called?
See, again, like, Fury of the Gods or Wrath of the Gods or something like that. So on the same note, like, yeah, I enjoyed the first Shazam, but I'm not rushing out to see this one, the sequel, or Black Adam. Like, I'll see it at some point, but it just doesn't get me excited anymore like it used to. Maybe I'm just getting older and Star Wars has lost its appeal, but I definitely think from like an objective point of view, the stories are much less interesting than the original sequel.
Well, when it comes to lore, though, I mean, we've got something else coming up, right after the intro that really gets into some lore. And I understand you have some questions for me.
I do.
For that. I'm excited for that. But should we get started?
Yes, please.
Welcome to the Extra Buttery Podcast. It's a show about movies, TV, anything with a story and actors on a screen, really. Join Jason Chan and Robert Snow's free-flowing conversation with deep dives into characters and plot with the occasional salty opinion. So get your popcorn, I got mine right here. Let's start the show!
Welcome to episode 113 of the Extra Buttery Podcast. My name is Robert Snow in Toronto, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jason Chen, in Vancouver. And this time on the show, we're going to be talking about Jason's experience at VIFF, as well as a movie that came out last month, but we're circling back around to. It was the source of a lot of controversy, but is the movie, even worth talking about? Or is the drama behind the scenes all that really matters? But before we get into any of that, we just got the finale for The Lord of the Rings of Power on Amazon Prime. This was something that I was very excited for the past couple of years, more big budget Tolkien content on our screens, albeit on our small screens. And we dove into the first two episodes on our last podcast, and now that we're 8 episodes into it, with another, at least another season on its way at some point in the next couple of years, we got a lot to talk about. Some big revelations.
You will be known at last for who you truly are. For you are Lord Sauron.
What did you think of the whole season as a unit?
I was going to ask you that question because I actually think it got progressively worse.
Why am I not surprised?
Rob just did like a double take. He almost choked on his water. You don't find that? You didn't find it got progressively weaker? I thought it got progressively more melodramatic. A lot of the plot things didn't make sense. And I just thought it was really funny. So we're going into spoiler territory now, right?
Yes.
So the last part, where the Southlands is revealed to be Mordor.
Yeah.
And like there's some random orc henchman being like, Adar, what do we call this place?
Yeah.
And Adar's kind of thinking about it thoughtfully, and then instead of saying Mordor, the camera kind of transitions up and you see Southlands and it disappears and Mordor pops up.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was really funny because I bet the actor playing Adar was chomping at the bit to say Mordor, but he never got that chance. And I thought the reveal was really melodramatic. Same with the rest of the show. I thought the last 3 episodes, starting from when they leave Numenor, felt really rushed.
I will agree with you on that one very specific point, in that the arrival of the Numenorians was very rushed. They compressed,
far too convenient. Far too what's it called? It's not like plot armor, but it served the screenplay much better. From going from Numenor to the middle of a battle right on time.
Yeah. No, I 100% know what you mean. Like those 2 episodes together, stretching from the Numenorians arriving to the reveal of the Southlands now being called Mordor, there were definitely some cringy things in there. That was probably the weaker moments of the whole season were contained in there, but I think it made up for it in the finale, just from like tying things off. At least it dropped a few cliffhangers and gave us a sense of what to expect in the coming season without it being too much of a tease.
I don't know how this was rumored for a long time, but I don't know how I feel about the revelation that Halbrand is Sauron. What did you think of that?
He was a strong contender from early on, basically since the character was introduced, because people who are familiar with Sauron's backstory and things that had been written down about him in the appendices, which is what the show is drawing from, know that Sauron spends a lot of time disguising himself in, for lack of a better word, sexy disguises. he likes hiding as like good looking people.
But why male models?
Yeah. He was known to do that in the first age of the Tolkien universe. He lost that ability after he made the One Ring. That was why most movie people, most fans of the movies, will know him mostly as like the guy in the spiky outfit from the first part of Fellowship of the Ring. So to see him in this form, where he's using magic to disguise himself and essentially have a long game, I think that's pretty interesting. It's a side of the character we haven't seen before. Whether or not the reveal of Halbrand being him is earned, I mean, I'm up to discuss that. Did you feel like it was rushed?
Yes.
Or okay. But I mean, Galadriel had figured it out, so it's not like he didn't gain anything by like hiding it from her anymore.
No, and it was one of those like smart Ozymandias type moves where it's like, haha, I reveal myself and you know who I am, but too late. Like things are set in motion where you can't stop it. So I appreciate that part.
Yeah.
It just seemed, for a show that was so melodramatic, that was a little light. Like that isn't, it was just like, it was really quick.
Oh.
Yeah, it wasn't dramatic enough. For a whole show about how dramatic everything is.
Right.
You know? Like, oh no, the elves are dying. Oh no, the dwarves are, cruel and unusual and they don't like to help people because they're more concerned about their own safety. And they have this like overly long discussion, and same with the elves, blah, blah, blah. So I thought that reveal was kind of like, okay, all right, I'll buy it, but I needed more. Like, hopefully that gets fleshed out in season 2.
Okay. Well, what was the question you were going to ask though?
Well, okay, so Galadriel figures out that he is Sauron, but she goes ahead and makes the 3 rings anyway. And then she kind of has this sort of like mysterious eye sort of moment with Elrond, and I'm not exactly sure what that means.
Well, think back to the first movie, to Galadriel's monologue at the very beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, where she talks about the rings, how they were made, and she says, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but like 3 were made for the elves, wisest and fairest of all beings. And then something, the rings for the dwarves, the rings for the men. But they were all of them deceived, for in secret, another ring was made.
Yeah,
so,
that was the One Ring.
So
yeah.
the idea is that the elves have to believe that they're in control for a little while. They make the rings thinking that they've harnessed the power of the mithril to, restore their immortality and build up they get magic powers from these rings.
Okay,
so they think that they've achieved this thing and they've maybe beaten Sauron, but he's going to go back around, partially by what we see in the final shot of the finale. He goes into Mordor, he builds up his kingdom there so that he can forge the One Ring eventually.
So basically what that scene implies is that Galadriel has become a victim to her own hubris. Basically.
A little bit, yeah, which sort of fits her character because she spends most of the season charging into things without fully understanding what's going on. Or
I know, it's a classic Peter Parker thing where
yeah.
All right, now you got to fix the problem that you created, you numbskull.
And there's been a lot of criticism of her character online, as people are wont to do. They think that this version of the character doesn't line up with who we see Cate Blanchett playing in the movies, but I don't really think that that's a fair complaint because
I actually think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because she's supposed to be somebody who, I think you mentioned it the last time we were talking about the show. You're supposed to believe that there's darkness in her somewhere, that there's a temptation to take things too far or to harness a power in an attempt to do good, but actually be led down an evil path, So we get all that from that character.
Yeah, and we're also conditioned to think that Cate Blanchett is a good guy. But maybe not so much because she's played some villains like Hela.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, she's one of our greatest actresses.
The villain in Indiana Jones way back. So I totally buy it. It's the rest of the supporting cast that I don't really buy. The boy kind of annoys me. I'm not quite sure why Waldreg betrays the humans.
Well, he's supposed to come from a tribe of men who historically turned to evil.
Okay. All right. Well, men are evil. Great. Message received.
Which, they revisit, they talk about that in Return of the King too.
Yeah,
Elrond has a dim view of men and he thinks that they're beyond saving and he doesn't believe that Aragorn can bring them together. And he certainly doesn't believe that Aragorn can go into the mountain and get the ghosts to team up with him because those are all supposed to be guys who sided with Sauron as well.
I thought the most interesting relationship was still Elrond and Durin.
Yep.
That's, I think, the highlight for me of the show, other than the fact that it looks spectacular. If you watch this and you appreciate the CGI and the scenery, watch Hot D and you'll be like, wow, some of these dragons really look like crap.
Well, that's what I'm saying. For me, and we mentioned this last time too, I will always have a place in my heart for Lord of the Rings over the Game of Thrones universe. There's just things about it that I find comforting and more welcoming.
Yeah, it appeals to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I will have a bias against it. But, I mean, there are, like you were saying, there are melodramatic parts in this season. There's definitely cringy parts that I wish weren't in there. But
a lot of slow-mo,
but when you think about the movies too, I mean, there's parts of the movies that we don't necessarily like either. So
yeah, agreed. And overall, it's a great show. It just kind of got worse for me as it went on, just because I start the little nitpicking and some of the plot stuff. They just kind of start piling up.
Did it ever get to the point where you would if somebody came to you and said, "Hey, I really like the movies, but I've decided to hold off on watching the show right away. I prefer to circle back when it's a few months from now or whatever." Would you not recommend the show, or would you still recommend it despite its faults?
I would still recommend it, but I wouldn't be like, "Oh, you need to go out and watch this." If someone, it's kind of it's one of those things where when people are like, "Yeah, is it worth seeing?" I'm like, yeah, if you're into that kind of genre and that universe, yeah, it's worth seeing. But if you're not, if you're a casual Tolkien fan, I don't think there's a lot of appeal there.
Yeah. Well, it definitely is something that, like a lot of geeky fan things, you get a lot more out of it from the more you know about the lore.
Yeah, agreed.
There are whole moments in this where I can be sitting there and being like, oh, interesting, they're going that direction with that character, or that deviates from the mythology in these sorts of ways. Any thoughts about the wizard?
Well, I was going to get to there. So we're talking about melodramatic stuff, and I think the most melodramatic stuff is the stuff with the wizards and the little pre-Hobbit people. The main character, I forget her name already, Nori.
Yep.
She drives me nuts. She's annoying as hell. I think her and her relationship is very much a reflection of Frodo and Sam.
Sure.
There's a bit of a, not a bromance, I guess just like a girlmance there. All the singing, the poetry, the whole wide-eyed look, the whole like, we must forge on because we're good, because we believe in good and we believe in a brighter future. That stuff doesn't speak to me. The wizard was an interesting choice. Am I to believe that the wizard is Saruman?
No. I think the strongest contender right now is that he's not a character that we've met before.
Oh, okay. He's one of those ones that goes out east and we never hear from again.
Yes, because he spends part of this episode being told to go to Rune, which is a land in the east. And historically, the three wizards that we've met so far in the other adaptations never went to Rune.
Okay.
So that seems to be the writers kind of tipping their hat a little bit towards making him a blue wizard and not one of the characters we know.
It's kind of interesting, though, that they would go to so many lengths to establish his character, establish the relationship with the Proud Feet, and then just have him like fuck off to Rune. Like just say like, hey, yeah, you came in an asteroid, you caused a lot of mystery, and I guess you got rid of the pale dude with the flames and stuff, but hey, we'll see you never.
Yeah. It is a choice. I mean, I would say the melodramatic stuff and the cringier parts of this show are one thing I don't like. The other thing I don't like is how often it quotes the Jackson movies. So
yes, there's some callback.
There's some callback lines and stuff, and things that are like, they seem to be kind of holding the hand of the audience a little bit too much, where it's like, oh, here's a line that you will recognize. Here's something in case you were too dumb to pick up on the hints that we left you earlier, kind of thing. And so like, there's a chance here that like, you know, they're trying to make people think that this guy is Gandalf, for example, because he says a couple of lines that are similar to Gandalf. And I'm like, well, no, not really. I hope that they do something a little bit more interesting with his character where like, yeah, let's have him go off to Rune and then let's find out why Rune is interesting. Because like in Tolkien's writing, Rune was a place where Sauron hangs out after he gets kicked out of Mordor for a time. And he tries to stir up a lot of like evil dudes over there to fight back against Gondor.
Why does Sauron get kicked out of Mordor?
Because he gets his ass handed to him by the elves.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So when we meet him in the movies, he's already been defeated by the elves once before.
Yes.
Oh, that's right, because he gets his hand cut off and it starts the whole thing. The rings get
even
lost.
Before that.
Oh, okay.
Even before that. Yeah.
Okay, so he's been defeated multiple times. The guy just like,
yeah,
it's like a cockroach. He just keeps coming back.
Exactly. Yeah. So if the elves feel like oh, not him again about Sauron, it's kind of warranted because they've you know.
And just like visually, I find the wizard and the hobbits the least interesting. It's like, great, yeah, they all wear, you know, potato sacks and they're covered in dirt and stuff and they love apples. Great. Can we just move on, please?
The wizard fight was cool, though. I mean, he destroys those ghoul ladies. I heard one person refer to them as the Nazgals. But the way he kind of like, you know, suddenly wakes up and becomes very wizard-like and
then learns how to speak perfect English.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. It's just one of those things where I was like, I'm not that interested. And then I was like, oh, maybe he's like Saruman or Radagast or one of the wizards. I'm like,
yeah,
but probably not, because he's just going to go somewhere else and screw off. And so I'm kind of interested in that storyline, but it's definitely the bottom of the three for me.
That's fair. I mean, this could very well end up being one of those seasons where they're just doing a lot of work to lay a lot of foundation, and they might get a whole new suite of writers in the second season, and it could feel very different. You know, I mean,
I kind of hope not, though. Like, it's not so bad that it needs to be changed. I wish there was more continuity.
But, you know, maybe they find a groove where they don't need as much of the melodramatic or the cringy stuff or as many of the hand-holding kind of references. Maybe they get rid of that and they kind of trim it down and focus it a bit more. You know, who knows?
Yeah, it does definitely drag.
But yeah, I mean, of all the things it could have been, like, it could have ended up like the Hobbit movies. It didn't it didn't end up like that. So I'm happy.
Yeah, it could have been a disaster. It got review bombed, and I disagree with the review saying that it's a terrible show. I think there are certain things wrong with it, but in terms of like production value and technical ability, like this show is still up there.
Yeah, well, the stuff with the review bombing, like they hire a freelancer who is willing to shit on the show for, you know, however much he gets paid, like $500 for a blog post, and then they get a bunch of traffic from it because people disagree with the headline, and et cetera, et cetera. The cycle continues. But yeah, I hope the show will rise above some of that kind of pettiness, and I'm you know, if it takes another 2 years to get season 2, then, you know, I'll fill it up by watching some Hot D.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't take 2 years to film the next season. But yes, watch Hot D. We just finished episode 9, and that was a really great episode. So
yeah, I heard a lot of buzz on Twitter.
Yeah, and I'm curious as to your thoughts as someone who leans toward more LOTR than I do.
Yeah,
and I lean more House Game of Thrones than you do, compared to LOTR anyway. So it's just gonna be interesting to see where you rank the two shows, because to me, I think House of the Dragon is the superior show.
So how many episodes are they doing of House of the Dragon?
10.
Okay, so finale is next week.
Yes, and like the Rings of Power, it's actually a lot of stage setting, because House of the Dragon is actually about the civil war within the Targaryen family, and we haven't even started the civil war. Like,
right,
people are still drawing battle lines.
Right, of course. Well, that was very much the first season of Game of Thrones too. I think they said they have a plan for like 4 seasons so far, right?
Oh wow, okay. Oh, interesting. There's a lot of interesting characters, and I'm sure you'll love Matt Smith as Daemon Targaryen.
Yeah, I like a bit of Matt Smith.
VIFF?
Well, VIFF, yeah, let's talk about VIFF. So last episode of this show, we spent a lot of time talking about my exploits at TIFF, and then VIFF is the next up. It sounds like you saw at least one of the same things that I saw at TIFF, but then the rest of your experience was very different. You picked up a few of the movies that were also on my short list, but I couldn't get into. So maybe let's start by, do you want to talk about...
Start from the bottom. How about let's start from the bottom?
From the worst stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll run through, just do like quick little hits on the worst things.
Yeah, because I don't want to waste too much time on them.
Yeah, all right.
Time is kind of the essence. So I have them ranked on Letterboxd if you want to check it out. So I saw 9 movies, or 9 films, 8 movies, and 1 documentary, and there will be more to come because I'm just catching up on some of the screeners I got. Just been a crazy week, so I didn't get to see everything that I wanted to, but I will in time. So at the bottom, I was actually kind of excited for this one. This is called MAIGRET, directed by a guy named Patrice Leconte. This is starring Gerard Depardieu, and if you don't know MAIGRET is this detective from French literature who is like really kind of surly, but no less smarter than like Sherlock Holmes or one of those. He's one of those like great literary detectives, you know.
He's like 1950s era.
Sort of. I honestly couldn't tell you because this movie, like, I swear, I think I dozed off twice.
Oh god.
So, this was easily, I think, the most boring movie I've seen this year at VIFF. It's not the worst movie I've seen at VIFF in overall, but I mean, it's close to the bottom, and I find this a very disengaging crime thriller, and I think that's actually hard to do. The story revolves around this girl who is murdered, so, you know, soaked in blood in a bloody dress, and MAIGRET has to go around and solve this mystery. Unfortunately, I can't tell you how he does this or why it's important, because the film is a jumbled mess, in my opinion. It has no intrigue. There's no... Usually with like a detective thriller, there's a bit of like a cat and mouse thing where, like, you know, there's some plot twists regarding the villain or the evidence or something, and this movie never pops like you think it would. So I would pass. This movie didn't get a lot of buzz, and I think for a good reason. The next one I saw is called The Forger. This is a German film directed by 2 people, Maggie Perrin and Corbinian Wandinger.
Whoa.
This is based on a true story. about a young man named Sioma. He is a Jewish person living in Nazi Germany, and he is formerly an art student working in a factory. He gets discovered for his talent for drawing, and he ends up making fake passports to save Jews from the extermination camps. Now, on paper, this sounds great, right? Like young German guy, fearing for his life, doing this really high risk heroic thing. Now, the problem with this film is that Sioma is not a very particularly heroic character. And I say this because he's one of those heroes where he's supposed to be in hiding, but he chooses to hide in plain sight. And by that, I mean he chooses to be this, like, I wouldn't say flamboyant, but this very charismatic, like, look at me type young person that draws too much attention to himself. Kind of like, hey, I'm really good at doing this. And just to rub it into Nazis' faces, I'm going to go to this Nazi restaurant and hang out with these Nazi officers and make jokes with them. And meanwhile, look at how smart I am because I'm deceiving everyone. And obviously at some point, this young man gets into trouble and has to forge a passport for himself to escape Nazi Germany. Again, could have been great, could have been a good film, but you don't root for the main protagonist, and I think that is a big reason why this movie doesn't work.
Is he just too good at his thing? Like, there's not enough tension?
It's never explained. Say for the first scene, for example, the first time he's asked to forge a passport, he lives with this roommate, and he's told to, like, you're never to tell anyone about this secret project of yours because for obvious reasons. And meanwhile, he goes home, starts making these forged passports. And the first thing he does is, 1, tell his buddy about it. 2, leave his door open while he's forging passports. And 3, just carrying these forged passports in like a rolled up piece of newspaper. Like, there's no sort of subtlety with him. And I think that makes it frustrating because for someone who's supposedly heroic, he's not being very mindful. Meanwhile, all these characters that are helping him in this like little ring that they've got are fearing for their lives and keep telling him, look, you got to stay like low and keep a low profile. Otherwise we'll get found out. And it just seems like he's one of those young people who disregards other people's well-being. And it makes him really a difficult character to root for. But I don't know. It's kind of an interesting story. It just the true story is probably a lot better in my opinion. It's hard to find someone like Sioma who is so entitled and then still manage to get away with things. Like it's not someone you root for easily. Anyway, then I saw CORSAGE or CORSAGE. This is a trilingual film, I think. There's Austrian, because it's talking about the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Oh, okay.
And directed by Marie Kreutzer, stars Vicky Krieps, who we know from that Paul Thomas Anderson film.
Yes, from The Phantom Thread.
Yes, The Phantom Thread. So she's kind of made a career of herself of playing like really strong female characters who are very also anti-establishment, and it doesn't have to be like a patriarch.
Yes, yeah. She plays a similar character in Bergman Island, which I saw last year.
So she has this like rebellious independent streak in all the characters she kind of plays. She plays a historical character in this one, Empress Elizabeth of Austria. Again, it historically has been sort of a trendsetter, an outlier, because she's renowned for her beauty. She's renowned for doing things differently. Ends up being hooked on some sort of drug. I believe it's opium or heroin. But anyway, so this whole movie is basically about Elizabeth of Austria going against the grain, going against the establishment, going against the wishes of the king. I do think there's a thesis here, but again, visually and plot-wise, not particularly interesting. A film about Austrian history that's kind of like caught me off guard. Like, you kind of have to go in knowing a bit of Austrian history, and my European history is a little rusty at this point because it's been like freaking like 15 years since I cracked open a history textbook in college. So there's always that, but it kind of is halfway in, halfway out. There's a lot of visual tricks that the director does. Like, say, for example, she puts Vicky creeps in this room that's too small for her.
Oh.
Her head's butting against the ceiling, and the house is supposed to like symbolize sort of like the patriarch and the rules set against her, and how she's like much bigger than she deserves, or in the space that she occupies, she deserves to be bigger than that.
Right.
So interesting, a bit boring at times because you can only, say the same message so many times.
Right. So it wasn't as captivating as like another period piece, like say The Favorite from Yorgos Lanthimos.
No, definitely not. I find it very one note. Visually, it is kind of interesting, but you watch it for Vicky Creep's performance, and that's about it, I would say.
Right. Okay.
Next one, Viking by Stéphane Lafleur. This is a Canadian dramedy.
I was interested in this one. I saw the trailer.
Yeah, and so as you know, Canadian dramedies tend to be very tongue-in-cheek, a little black humor, very, very dry. This is the same. So Viking is about 5 men and women, ordinary people. One's a teacher and one's something, just ordinary jobs. And they're supposed to inhabit this little base in the middle of the desert. And they've been chosen because their personalities match the personality of astronauts who are in Mars right now. The problem with the Mars crew is that they've come into conflict. So in order to solve the conflict that is occurring between the 5 astronauts in Mars, they've selected 5 people on Earth as proxies, put them in this compound, and told them to recreate the similar sort of arguments as the astronauts in Mars so that they have a better idea of how to resolve these issues and to transport or formalize a solution that they can send to the astronauts in Mars. So if you ever seen that show with Fred Armisen and John C. Reilly.
Oh, yes. I saw the trailer for it. I didn't watch it. But didn't they also have a similar episode on that Steve Carell Netflix show Space Force?
Yeah. So the one I'm referring to is called Moonbase 8. Moonbase 8 is hilarious, and part of it is because you have Armisen and John C. Reilly.
Yeah.
And the other one that you mentioned was
I think it's Space Force.
Yeah, Space Force. So Steve Carell. Those are more like a little more like slapstick, a little bit more like awkward humor.
Yeah.
Viking has a bit of that, but it's mostly about people, trying to find autonomy. Yes, these 5 people are supposed to be proxies for the astronauts, and they're supposed to recreate these controversies and fights that they have, but they start to rebel slowly because they feel like having to act like this person that they don't know goes against their free will.
It sort of sounds a bit like The Rehearsal too.
A little bit. So there's definitely a bit of a meta quality to it. There are times where you're not quite sure if you're in a mockumentary or a movie, and I think that's intentional. The problem with this film is that it's just really not that funny.
Oh no.
Certainly some of the dialogue is a bit pointed. Some of the conflicts are kind of interesting. You have this one screwball guy who speaks half French, half English, but they never really take it anywhere. Even the main character who gets fed up with the situation he's in, he kind of goes outside, finds other people who are involved in the same experiment that he had no idea was happening, but he just kind of lets it slide, and there's no there's no turning point where there's this big reveal or this big rebellion against his superiors. And I think that's where it kind of loses me. There's no structure to it. It's really hard for me to pinpoint what the climax is, what the turning point is, and it kind of ends because it has to, because the experiment just ends, and there's no real conclusion to what's happening beyond the fact that this was a dumb idea by the Space Force to conduct anyway.
Okay.
As you can tell, this year's VIFF, not the strongest lineup, or not the best picks so far.
I hope we're moving towards a good conclusion here.
Okay, so yeah, it is getting better. Okay, so next one up, Decision to Leave by Park Chan-wook. Park Chan-wook is this really famous Korean director. You guys probably know him from The Handmaiden. Somewhat confusing but sexy thriller.
Right.
This is kind of the same. So Decision to Leave stars Tang Wei, who is a Chinese actress, and she plays a refugee who escapes from China to Korea to basically forge a new life for herself. She marries this dude who dies because he fell off a cliff. There is some implication, or it's implied that she pushed him, but it's ruled a suicide by the cop who does the investigation.
Okay.
The cop rules this because he becomes infatuated with this woman. He kind of falls in love with her a little bit from afar. So he basically botches the investigation, but he's like, okay, whatever. You know what?
Okay.
Like, no one cares. This fell off a mountain. He dies. No harm done. Years later, he stumbles across another case where a man dies, and he finds out that the wife of this man is the same widow that he investigated many years ago. So now he's starting to think like, okay, so like she's marrying rich and killing these guys off for their money.
Oh, Black Widow style.
Exactly. But he's caught because he loves this woman. He finds her mysterious. He finds her beautiful. And Tang Wei, like, for someone who's not Korean, she does a really good job of like playing this actress, and she speaks Chinese and Korean, and it's kind of funny because she starts using Google Translate on her phone to like talk to the detectives and whatnot. And so okay. there's a bit of a comedy in that. So the problem with this though is that it kind of drags. It's hard to root for the detective because it's kind of like a Basic Instinct type thriller plot without the sexiness.
Oh.
And there's not a lot of action either way in terms of like the sensual attraction that they have, or even like the murders that are implied that she commits. And it's really well shot, really interesting stuff. I have found that in recent films, especially Korean films, I don't know if that's a Korean thing or just in general, is that they have characters texting to each other, but then the text will show up on the screen itself to show you what they're texting. And that, for some reason, just kind of annoys me.
Yeah, that was definitely a thing in American films for a while, and then it got a little bit cliche, and maybe the Koreans are having a phase with it too.
Yeah, and so because she's Chinese, her Korean's like not on point, so there's always like misunderstandings and some jokes in between. But I as someone who's excited for this film because it was Park Chan-wook, I was a little disappointed. I didn't think there was a turn or a big moment that really lures you in, and the ending is just, it's so melodramatic and somewhat unbelievable that you kind of leave the theater feeling dissatisfied and bewildered, and maybe that was his like goal, but I don't like leaving a film thinking that way. It's different from like leaving a film open to interpretation. It's another to just do something really bizarre with the characters.
And so of Park Chan-wook's films, like, did you enjoy The Handmaiden, say, or? I
think The Handmaiden was better executed. I wouldn't say I enjoyed it per se, but better execution.
Yeah. I mean, of his films, I've only seen Oldboy.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably like his most famous that's made an impact over here in North America. But
that same tension that you get from Oldboy is never present in this film, and I think that's a big miss.
Yeah, especially for something with those kind of sort of serious overtones.
Yeah, and a Black Widow plot. So it's hard to tell sometimes, especially with some of these films. Like, we always want to like pigeonhole them into some sort of genre.
Yeah.
And instead sometimes film just ends up being bits of everything. So Decision to Leave has that problem. The Forger has a bit of that problem. Viking a little bit, where like it just doesn't really know what it wants to be. I wish they would commit to one thing and just like commit to it fully. So anyway, all right, we're getting on to the better stuff.
Okay.
The third one on my list is RICEBOY SLEEPS. This is directed by Anthony Shim. This is one of the films I was kind of excited to watch, as I told you in the previous episode.
Mm-hmm.
Anthony Shim, so he is a local director / actor. I saw his first film called Daughter 3 years ago at VIFF 2019.
Oh.
I think we talked about it. I did not like it at all. It was gut-wrenching, really, I think, poorly thought out and kind of cliched. And you get the same sense with RICEBOY SLEEPS. I think this is autobiographical. He hasn't really come out, but it's about a South Korean single mother who moves from Seoul, or Korea, not Seoul, moves from Korea to Canada in the 1990s. And so it kind of mirrors Anthony Shim's own life of being an immigrant and living in Coquitlam. First thing I will say is that this is very nostalgic. He nails down the look of the 90s, everything from like the baggy jeans, the haircuts, some of the mobile classrooms that I've seen in Coquitlam before, some of the struggles of like just being a new transplant in a new country. And it follows the life of Dong Hyung, who is the kid who is supposed to be, I think, Anthony Shim. He goes by David as his new English name. And it kind of follows him from when he first moves to Canada, when he's 10 years old, to his teenage years when he's 15, 16, trying to figure out where he fits. Deeply personal, but I do think Anthony Shim's director trademark is being as depressing and as depressing as he can. A lot of gut punches, a lot of like just bad shit that happens.
Right.
And it really teeters on the edge of like disaster porn kind of.
Oh, yeah.
Like kind of like, okay, let's take the roughest parts of society. Let's beat these people down. Let's make sure that they have the worst experience possible, and then let's rebuild them.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole genre of like novel, I could say. Like, I feel like some of the things that get the biggest critical appraisals in like the novel world are stories like that, and I've never been that drawn to them. I don't like to have a bad time, but
we see multiple acts of racism. We see his mom get sexually harassed. We see him get beat up by bullies. We see him as a victim of a school system that tends to look down upon immigrants or foreigners. And so, yeah, sometimes it gets a little tough to watch, and I get that's his purpose, but it doesn't have a lot of appeal as a viewer. Like it kind of makes you feel sick to your stomach.
You almost need to like go watch an action film or an animation or something afterward to cleanse your palate.
Exactly. And not only are these people hated on by society, but they get dealt a rough hand. They have to deal with illness and sickness and family members who are, who aren't very well. And at some point it just gets tiring. Okay, the final two films. I have these kind of tied at the top. I really still haven't decided which one I like more.
Yeah.
So the first one I'm going to introduce is Broker. This one was the film I was most looking forward to. Directed by Hirokazu Koreeda, who I saw Shoplifters. Yeah, and Like Father, Like Son. So again, this is another one of those films that deals with like, our conceptions about what is a family.
Right.
So Broker, starring Song Kang-ho, who he has worked with many, many times. He's the main actor in Parasite and Memories of Murder. And so he's back. Broker refers to him and his sort of understudy. They're two men who work or hang around a local church, and this local church has a box for people to basically, for lack of a better word, dump their unwanted babies. Basically like giving them up for adoption through this like mail slot, basically. So basically what we're seeing now in some of the southern states that have anti-abortion laws. Yeah. So this is quite relevant actually. And apparently this is a big thing in Korea, and Korea has very traditional stigmas about, in what situations where you have kids. So obviously you have to be married, your husband has to be of a certain status, blah, blah, blah. So Broker is about these two guys who basically kidnap a baby dropped off by this really young woman and try to sell him for money for a couple who wants to adopt a kid, but doesn't want to go through the old means of doing it. And so the woman of this child eventually finds out what these two guys are up to. So she ends up tagging along. They end up near this orphanage. This precocious young boy who looks up to these two guys, and he tags along too. So it's basically got two guys, a woman, and a young boy and a baby, and this is like their newfound family, kind of like in Shoplifters.
Yeah,
where,
yeah,
like,
very similar.
None of them are related, but they play traditional father, brother, uncle, mother, daughter roles in this group. The extra wrinkle is that there's two female undercover cops, tailing them, trying to nab them for human trafficking. And it's kind of funny in that sense, because these two women keep waiting for these brokers to make a deal, but this mom is adamant that they sell the baby to someone who she likes, and not to the highest bidder. So there's a lot of like moral conversations and moral ethics that come into play, and it's kind of interesting. I think it would be enjoyed more if you were more familiar with like Asian family dynamics and the culture of Korea, but it's a relatively easy film to understand. Unlike Shoplifters, though, there is no big dramatic moment. Everything is fairly flat, and I don't mean that in a boring way. I just don't mean that for a film that involves human trafficking, it is not particularly thrilling or exciting. I don't want to spoil it, but there's no like big shootout. And I remember walking out of the screening for this, and I overheard a couple walking in front of me, and the guy was like, I don't know if I like this film or not. And I think it's because people expected it to be exciting and wonderful, and it's not those things. And so I wonder if it's because our expectations are kind of skewed. Like, you go in thinking human trafficking, oh great, car chase, botched deals, gangs. No, not this film.
Yeah, it sounds very much of like, very much a Koreeda specialty, though, like finding the drama in moments that would be a thriller in other people's hands, but in this are like a tragic comedy kind of setup that's a lot more subtle and like you were saying, like concerned about morals and ethics rather than the like cops and robbers aspect of it.
Which brings us to my final film, which is one you saw.
Yes.
This is Triangle of Sadness, Ruben Östlund.
So we got into the plot of it in our last episode, but do you want to remind everyone based on, because you saw it more recently than I did, and I'm curious to see which parts jumped out at you.
Yeah, sure. So basically the gist of this story is that it's more of Ruben Östlund's sort of political commentary on the rich.
Eat the rich.
In modern society, and the story revolves around a Instagram couple mainly who go on this cruise full of rich people, and this cruise basically gets capsized, and they all wash up on this island, and it becomes Lord of the Flies-esque.
Yes.
That's basically the gist of it. I had mixed feelings about this one, and mostly it stems from the ending.
Yes, I think I might have felt the same way, but continue.
Okay, so I loved all the lead up to it. I think it's hilarious. I thought and we're going to spoiler territory, I guess, but the puking and the toilet shit stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean that literally, like shit overflowing everywhere.
Puking and shitting at the same time in many cases.
That was a little much for me.
Yes.
Yes. And not because I'm not used to it. Like, God knows I grew up on the raunchiest teen comedies. But at some point it becomes like, okay, I get your point. Ha ha ha.
Yeah.
Funny. Let's move on.
Yes. He really, like, it's a situation where he's got the knife in, and he's twisting and he's twisting and he's twisting again. And in the screening I was at, it was a packed screening, and people were, they were reacting as you'd expect to react. It was a mix of like shock and entertainment and gross out, and people can't believe what they're seeing because it's just so much, and there's no cutting away. But is it?
I get what he's trying to do in that, like, it's sort of like an absurdist comedy, but at the same time, it's like, okay, enough of the dining scene. I get it, and you're right. He has that knife, which is, if you want to make an analogy out of it, is the food they serve, which looks gross and dangerous. And then more than that, he makes you watch them eat it and then throw up everything as well.
Yep.
It goes on for like a good 10 minutes, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, maybe 20 by the time you count all of the like ship sinking stuff.
Yeah, because I do think it's a bit of an overly long film.
Yeah, it could do to lose like 20 minutes probably.
Yeah, okay. So we move past that. They wash ashore. Okay, things are different. This is really interesting now, right? Like we see the power dynamics at play. And it's very interesting that the housekeeper becomes the basically king of the island, and it makes a lot of sense that way. What I didn't get was the whole thing about the luxury hotel on that island and how they were stuck on the wrong side. Yeah. And then the end, I didn't get the ending. Well, it implies a lot of different things, but how did you interpret the ending of Carl running towards Yaya and Yaya's ultimate fate?
I mean, it feels like the movie wants you to believe that, whatever the name of the self-appointed queen is, it wants you to believe that she kills Yaya with the stone. And
yeah, I totally think that happens though.
Yeah, and so then, her boyfriend is running towards her because he's had this realization. He knows that like maybe Yaya had hoped to off her, if she got an opportunity to like push her down a cliff or something. But in the way it plays out, Yaya is on the receiving end. And so he goes running towards her, hoping to stop it. But I guess he'll be too late. Because that'll be the ultimate irony, right? Is that they're literally feet away from a luxurious resort with an elevator going up into, everything they need. But their baser instincts led them to, destroy each other without, instead of working together,
I would have ended the film right when we think that Yaya is going to be bludgeoned to death by that stone, and I would have left out the shot of Carl, the model boyfriend, running towards her. I don't know if this is like pandemic related, but I just felt like the catalog wasn't nearly as strong. Like if I'm taking the best film from each VIFF I went to, the top film for this one, either Triangle of Sadness or Broker, is not anywhere close to like Parasite or Burning or Worst Person in the World or Another Round. Like those are films I genuinely really, really liked and loved. Couldn't say the same for this year's VIFF.
That's fair. I mean, I would say something similar for TIFF. I think, there's generally maybe a bit of a lull happening right now where we've kind of exhausted our reserves of like movies that had been delayed due to COVID, but there were a lot of productions that didn't get started because of COVID. So now, maybe next year will be a bit stronger. I don't know. You still haven't seen Banshees of Inisherin though. So
that's true. That's true.
That was my strongest TIFF screening by far.
If Banshees is as good as you say, and having seen the competition already, I would imagine that Banshees of Inisherin would be my number one once I see it.
But I mean, don't let me build it up too much because it's
seriously, like anything that gets built up, I'm just like always disappointed afterwards.
No, you have to go into it. I think you have to go into it knowing that it has a melancholy third act. It is not a laugh riot at a certain point. So it has a shift, but.
I have noticed that with all the movies I've seen, except for maybe a couple, they all kind of end on a kind of mixed or depressing note.
Well, I think we can cram in 5 minutes on another movie that sort of fits that bill as well. Don't Worry, Darling.
Welcome to the Victory Project. We're all here because we believe in the mission.
What are we doing?
Changing the world.
What are we doing?
Changing the world.
That's right.
What do you think they're really doing out there?
But this is the film where like Olivia Wilde's love triangle, messy affair, homewrecker shit.
Yes.
Like bomb.
Yes.
Film.
I mean, it would probably take a genius level team to sort out, what kind of impact the behind the scenes drama might have had on box office and people's favorability towards this movie.
I definitely think it had an effect.
Yeah. It's just like in terms breaking it down in terms of raw numbers, I mean, like, undeniably it had some effect, but like, if you could put a dollar figure on it or whatever, that would be fascinating. But that all of that to say that, you know, if you've been on Twitter at all in the past couple of months, you might have heard of some of the drama. It's touched down in all sorts of different fandoms. You know, you've got Olivia Wilde, who set herself up with Booksmart as a director who was clearly making movies for women, or, you know, trying to be the new vanguard of female filmmakers in Hollywood who, you know, were stepping away from the patriarchy and all of that and fighting back. And, you know, she does all this press leading up to the release of this movie, Don't Worry, Darling, which is a sci-fi, you know, 1950s.
Oh, it's sci-fi?
Yeah, it's sci-fi for sure.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
It's got some sci-fi elements, but it's couched in this like 1950s Stepford Wives-esque setting. And, you know, the movie on its face has a lot of interesting things about it. It's got that kind of genre background, but it's got a great cast with Chris Pine and Florence Pugh, and a whole bunch of other supporting actors. Olivia Wilde's in it herself. Then you find out that, like, Olivia Wilde's having a messy divorce from Jason Sudeikis, or, well, they were never truly married, but they were in a long-term partnership. They've got kids together. You know, this is how messy it gets. There were accusations that Harry Styles spit on Chris Pine at the Venice Film Festival.
I saw that.
To the point that Harry Styles mentioned it at a New York concert that he was doing. You know, he mentioned
that he had actually.
Well, he joked about it because he didn't really. But,
I see,
for about a day, everyone believed that he had. Florence Pugh refused to do press for the film. You know, she was angry.
Yeah.
She's apparently friends with Jason Sudeikis, so she didn't like the whole affair stuff with Harry Styles, but also she found working with Olivia Wilde difficult, and they didn't like each other, you know, on a professional level. Shia LaBeouf was mixed in there. You know, it was, you know, you could probably, if you haven't heard about any of it, just go and read about it. But in some ways it was more interesting than the movie itself. But the movie concerns Florence Pugh as a woman who finds herself living in this utopian community somewhere in what appears to be like the Californian desert. It's sort of like sprung up out of nowhere. It's a constructed community. Everyone lives in these tidy little suburban homes, and they're all dressed in 1950s era finery. The men go off and work in some mysterious facility underground throughout the day, and the women, they have all of their needs catered to. They're just expected to go and shop, and then they come back and they take care of the house, and they make sure that the men have a big meal waiting for them when they come home. And, you know, it's all very tidy and polished and very patriarchy focused. But the longer that Florence Pugh's character spends in this scenario, the more she begins to suspect that there's some sort of ulterior motives at play. You know, she's not allowed to know where her husband goes to work. She's not allowed to ask him about his job. And the more she digs around and finds evidence of other women who have had similar questions, the more it gets repressed and her sanity is questioned. And eventually there's a revelation that I would say is, you know, moderately satisfying. Some people made it out to seem as though it was a complete letdown, that the movie actually falls apart in the third act. I disagree. I think that it definitely is not fleshed out enough to my liking, but at least it doesn't leave you with too many questions. There are some logistical problems with it. You know, the more you think about it, the more questions you have about, you know, how this whole community actually works. But, you know, as a sort of sci-fi-esque genre story with some really good acting in it, I would recommend it to people, you know, and maybe not as like a rush out to the movie theater kind of thing, but if it pops up for you on streaming, give it a watch. People have asked, you know, how is Harry Styles as Florence Pugh's husband? Not terrible. About as good as he was in Dunkirk, which is to say, you know,
passable.
He's in the movie. He can say lines, you know.
You give him more credit than that.
I know. No, he's fine. He's a fine actor. You know, who knows? Maybe he'll make a go of it and be in more things. He wasn't distracting, so he has that going for him.
Are you team Olivia Wilde?
I'm team Florence Pugh.
Okay.
This wouldn't work without her, I don't think.
Right. So do you think the movie would have been really different if Shia LaBeouf was the lead?
Yes. Different in a good way, hard to say. I mean, Shia LaBeouf brings such a different energy than Harry Styles in just about every...
He's also a far better actor.
Yeah, agreed. He would be a lot... I don't exactly know what his direction was for the performance. If we're talking like ripped from the headlines Shia LaBeouf, then that makes sense. You know, I think he could have brought a level of like menace to the husband character that I think Styles doesn't really put into it.
Is he like an abusive husband? Is that the character?
No, I mean, because the idea is that everything is supposed to be like, you know, Mr. Sandman, like everything's supposed to be perfect and everything. And it's not until the women start to dig a little bit below the surface that they realize that maybe they're being held against their will. The husband character, the Harry Styles character, is supposed to have good intentions, but he's clearly participating in a system that is not good for the women involved. So, you know, eventually you decide, you know, just how guilty he is by the end of the movie. If it were Shia LaBeouf in that role, I mean, kind of hard to picture him, honestly. It would be a different movie for sure.
But those are usually the ones where like you get the most, not necessarily positive, but like the biggest reactions, eh? Like when you don't know how a film would turn out if you had cast this person.
Yeah.
Kind of like Heath Ledger in The Joker, right? That's always going to be everyone's example where like the moment he was cast, people are like, huh, what? But then you see it, then you're like, okay, so this guy can do really different things. And I think Shia LaBeouf has that about him.
Yes.
And it's just a matter of like how much you have to rein him in.
Yeah. I think Shia LaBeouf would also be interesting in the Chris Pine role because the Chris Pine role is definitely a more menacing character. And
Chris Pine's not very menacing though. Eh?
No, I mean, he does a good job being menacing in this. I think because the way his character is set up allows him to kind of use what he's good at to draw out the menace of it. But we needed a lot more of Chris Pine's character in it. That's one of the ways that the finale or the final act sort of lets you down, is that it gives Chris Pine's character an out that maybe doesn't feel deserved and leaves you wondering, you know, okay, what's really going on?
From the way you describe that role, I always feel like someone like Bradley Cooper would be really good in that role.
Yeah, he'd be good in that. Yeah,
he's always like the handsome guy, but you know deep down he's not nice.
Yeah. Guillermo del Toro brought the best out of him in that in
Nightmare Alley.
Nightmare Alley.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of when you were talking about Chris Pine.
So, more people should watch Nightmare Alley, actually.
I agree. I think it's a bit of a cliched, and I don't think it's Del Toro's like more, you know, original works because there's no monsters and beasts, but it is a very, I think, satisfying story. Like
yes.
to tell, and I think he does a really good job, and so do the actors in Nightmare Alley too. Like, it's definitely, we're gonna look back in like 10 years and be like, how did we miss this? Does
Don't Worry Darling deserve a 38 or something on, you know, a green splat on the tomato meter? I don't know. I mean,
tomato meter, not tomato. Tomato.
I would have expected, you know, maybe something like a rating more in the 50s. Yeah, maybe not fresh, but I would have thought maybe a few more people would like it. But it's hard, right? I mean, you know, the movie comes out right on the tail of all of that bad press, and some people are going to let that kind of get to their heads when they're watching the movie. On that note, that about does it for this episode of the Extra Buttery Podcast. Thank you very much for listening. My name is Robert Snow in Toronto.
And my name is Jason Chen in Vancouver. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
The Extra Buttery Podcast is written, recorded, and produced by Jason Chen and Robert Snow. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to rate and subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. And remember, popcorn is always better with extra butter.